The idea of a Russian invasion of India is not a new concept. In fact, it dates back to the late 18th century when Tsar Paul I was in power in Russia. Paul I was known for his unusual and ambitious plans, including the idea of conquering India. But what led the Tsar to plan such an expedition, and what was the outcome of this plan? Firstly, it is important to understand the geopolitical context of the time. At the end of the 18th century, the Russian Empire was expanding its territories, and its interests were increasingly directed towards Asia. Meanwhile, the British Empire was at its peak, and its control over India was a major source of its power and wealth. The two empires were in competition for influence in Asia, and tensions were high. Tsar Paul I was convinced that the best way to challenge British power in India was to launch a military campaign from the north. He believed that the Russian army could easily defeat the British forces in India, and that this would give Russia access to the valuable resources and trade opportunities of the Indian subcontinent. He also believed that the Hindu population of India would be sympathetic to the Russians, who were seen as fellow Eastern Europeans, and would support their invasion. Paul I went so far as to create a special corps of soldiers, known as the Russian Indian Corps, to prepare for the invasion. The corps was made up of 12,000 soldiers, who were trained in the use of Indian weapons and tactics. The Tsar also tried to form alliances with the rulers of Central Asian states, who were seen as potential allies in the campaign. However, Paul I's plans were never put into action. In 1801, he was assassinated in a palace coup, and his son, Alexander I, became Tsar. Alexander was not interested in pursuing his father's grandiose plans, and the Russian Indian Corps was disbanded. Despite the failure of the plan, the idea of a Russian invasion of India continued to be discussed in political and military circles in Russia throughout the 19th century. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Russian army did fight against the British in India as part of the European theater of the conflict. However, the idea of a full-scale invasion was never pursued again. In conclusion, Tsar Paul I's plan to invade India was a bold and ambitious idea, driven by his desire to challenge British power in Asia. However, it was ultimately unrealistic and doomed to failure. Nevertheless, the plan reflects the geopolitical tensions of the time and the competition between the Russian and British empires for influence in Asia.